Hello everyone, and welcome to the video guide for the HAMtastic build. This is a build I've been running for about 6 months at the time of this video. I wrote a guide on Into the Mists back in September on it, but I have not had the chance to get around to making a video guide for it until now. For those who are interested in that written guide, you can find a link to it down in the description below. Now, before I get into the weapons, the skills, the traits, any of that stuff, the nitty-gritty, I'll go over the general concept behind this build. This build is designed to get in your opponent's face, deal a lot of damage, keep them on lockdown, and otherwise just go ham. Go ham on your opponent. The nature of the build is that it doesn't have a lot of passive defense. If you do not dodge, you will die very quickly. This build can be bursted down very, very quickly. You have to get in, deal the damage, kill your opponent before they can do anything serious back to you. Alright, starting with weapons and utilities, we've got the hammer and the greatsword. The hammer is both the primary source of control and the primary source of damage for this build. This is what you want to have out when you are trying to drop your opponent's health and keep them on lockdown. The greatsword is used more for utility, more for mobility, evasion. It's not going to be your main source of damage. It does have an effect on the fight. You do want to use it for damage, but it's not going to be the primary source of the damage like the hammer is. For our utility skills, we've got Healing Signet, Balance Stance, Endure Pain, Bull's Charge, and Signet of Rage. Healing Signet is used because the passive regeneration synergizes well with the combo-heavy nature of the build. Without having to worry about casting any heals, you're better able to focus on dealing damage and keeping your control chains running on your opponent and keeping them on lockdown. Balance Stance is used to give stability in the case where a lot of control effects are incoming to you, or you otherwise need to break out of a stun or a knockdown. Also, Balance Stance gives swiftness for either closing or creating gaps, and it gives you vigor, thanks to one of the traits mentioned later in the guide. Endure Pain is used both because it prevents burst damage during the duration, and it is a stun breaker. It's useful for situations where you are either being heavily CC'd and you need to break out of the biggest, such as a backbreaker from another warrior. Also, in situations where you're expecting a lot of damage to hit you all at once, such as a backstab from a thief or a shatter from a mesmer, this will prevent you from taking a large hit to your health and potentially dying. Bull's Charge is used to both interrupt and control your opponent, as well as to create and close gaps when necessary. Finally, we have Signet of Rage, which is primarily used for its activated effect of about 30 seconds of Fury, Swiftness, and Might. This serves as just a damage boost to the build and allows you to deal more damage to your opponents. Alright, now that weapons and skills have been taken care of, we'll move on into traits. The trait spread for this build is 0 in strength, 0 in arms, 30 in defense, 10 in tactics, and 30 in discipline. The reason there are no points in strength or arms, despite it being a very offensive build, is because all of the major traits in the last 3 lines are more beneficial to the build as a whole. Also, the lack of damage stats, the lack of power and precision that would be gained from strength and arms is made up for by the gear that this build uses, which will be mentioned later in the guide. Going down each trait line, in defense, for the first major trait, we've got Dog March. This reduces all snaring and immobilizing conditions by a third. Also, anytime any of these effects would hit us, it gives us 3 seconds of regeneration, although that can only happen every 10 seconds or so. Regardless, this is useful for keeping the warrior mobile, keeping the build from being snared. The second major trait taken in defense is Cleansing Ire. This both gives adrenaline when the warrior is hit, and it removes 1 condition for every bar of adrenaline spent when using a burst skill. This is the primary source of condition management for the build. Without it, this build would die very quickly to condition spam. The final major trait taken in defense is Merciless Hammer. This reduces the cooldown of all hammer skills and increases the damage of all hammer skills against opponents that are disabled. Disabled can mean they are stunned, knocked down, knocked back, any situation where an opponent is unable to perform an action. Dazed does not count for this. This trait is the major boost to the hammer that I was talking about earlier. This is why the hammer deals more damage than the greatsword in this build. Moving down to tactics, the one major trait taken in this line is Leg Specialist. This gives a 1 second immobilize on critical effects, such as from Blade Trail on the greatsword or Hammer Shock on the hammer. Keep a note that this can only happen once every 5 seconds. Nevertheless, it is very useful for closing gaps with opponents. Moving down into Discipline, the first major trait we take is Vigorous Focus. This is the trait that gives both Balance Stance and Endure Pain the bonus Vigor that I mentioned earlier, talking about utility skills. This is very useful for keeping the build alive in that you can dodge more often, maneuver out of AoEs, and otherwise dodge enemy attacks more often, and get into the fray without having to worry as much about death because you can avoid things more often with the extra dodges afforded by Vigor. The second major trait taken in Discipline is Destructionally Empowered. This gives 3% more damage per boon on your target. This serves purely as a damage boost to the build. It doesn't have any other reasoning behind it other than it's the most beneficial to the build in World of World. Finally, the last major trait in Discipline is Burst Mastery. This causes Earthshaker and Arcing Slice to both deal more damage and cost less adrenaline. Similar to Destructionally Empowered, this is mainly used as a damage boost to the build. However, there's also the fact that it causes these skills to use less adrenaline, which means you can use them more often because you do not need to regenerate as much adrenaline for each use of a 3-bar burst skill. One thing that should be mentioned about this trait is it does not conflict with Cleansing Ire. Many people would assume that because Burst Mastery causes the skills to only use 2 bars instead of 3 bars of adrenaline, that would only cause Cleansing Ire to remove 2 conditions. This is not true. You gain the benefit of 3 adrenaline bars, but you only use 2 adrenaline bars with Burst Mastery. Thus, Cleansing Ire will still remove 3 conditions despite only using 2 adrenaline bars. Since this is a World v World build, there are consumables that are associated with it. The utility nourishment used is the Sharpening Stone effect. I prefer Superior Sharpening Stones. This gives you extra power equal to 6% of your toughness and 4% of your vitality. For the food nourishment, we have Lemongrass Poultry Soup. This is used to reduce the duration of all incoming conditions by 40%. This, coupled with the rune set the build uses and the Dogged March trait, will effectively make the warrior immune to all snare effects. Now, moving on to the gear used with this build. Preferably, you want to use an entire set of Berserker stat gear. For those who do not know what Berserker stats are, it is power as the primary stat, followed by precision, followed by critical damage. This is done to maximize the damage that one can deal with the build and shut down opponents as quickly as possible. Like I said at the beginning of the video, this build is designed to get in, deal the damage, lock down opponents, and kill them before they can deal much back to you. For the rune set used with this build, Runes of Melandru are preferable. However, these can be substituted out for Holbrak. The important part is you have reduced condition duration on your gear, because this will allow you to have effective immunity to snares, as mentioned in the consumable section. For the accessories, again, full Berserker. In regards to whether Ascended is necessary or not, it is not. You can get away with a full set of exotic gear and still perform just fine with this build. Ascended is just for the little bit of extra that the people who want something to work towards can get. It improves the effectiveness of the build by roughly 5%, but it's not crucial. As for the sigils used on the weapons for this build, we have Impact in the hammer to further increase the damage of the hammer against disabled targets, and we have Force in the greatsword for more damage. And with that, that is the video guide to the HAMtastic build. For those who are interested in the written guide, again, I have a link to that down in the description below. Also, if you are interested in any gameplay examples of the HAMtastic build, feel free to check out the annotated video links or any of the highlights I have on this channel. They all give good examples of what to do and what not to do with the build in situations ranging from 1v1 to small group to large group, any number of situations. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like and throw a comment down below. It's always appreciated. If you're interested in more content like this, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be a bit more proactive about adding content in the future, other than just stream highlights. Also, speaking of the stream, I have a link to it in the description below. Feel free to check me out. I stream almost every day. I have a schedule on that channel. Feel free to stop by. We have a good time. I like to be interactive, so if you have any questions about the HAMtastic build, or if you just want to hang out and chat and enjoy some Guild Wars 2 gameplay, by all means, stop by.